Part 1, The Night Shift at Coldbrook Hospital in the heart of a densely wooded area in northern Vermont, Coldbrook Hospital stood as a remnant of past architectural grandeur. Its walls, constructed in the early 1900s, held within them stories that oscillated between miraculous recoveries and unexplainable medical anomalies. But for Nate Phillips, a newly hired security guard, the building was just the backdrop of his night shift, a routine job to finance his college education. Nate's first shift began on a chilly October evening. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital's crumbling facade. As he entered, the interior felt unnaturally cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and the fluorescent lights flickered as if protesting against the encroaching darkness. His job was straightforward: patrol the hospital, focusing on the abandoned north wing, which had been closed off for renovations that never came to fruition. This part of the hospital, he was told, was particularly prone to trespassers and vandals, drawn by its reputation for being haunted. As midnight approached, Nate started his first round. The halls of the north wing were lined with debris and peeling paint, and each step echoed ominously. He reassured himself that the noises were just the building settling or small animals that had found their way inside. Suddenly, his flashlight beam caught something unsettling, a child's red ball, rolling slowly across the floor towards him. It came to a stop at his feet. Nate froze, his heart pounding. The logical part of his brain suggested it was just the wind or rat nudging the ball, but the silence that followed was suffocating, unbroken by any natural sound. Shaking off the unease, Nate continued deeper into the wing. When he entered what used to be the pediatric ward, the temperature dropped further. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He was about to turn back when he heard a soft giggle, a child's giggle, followed by a whisper, "Come and play." Heart racing, Nate spun around, his flashlight scanning the empty room frantically. "He's there," he called out, his voice quavering. There was no response, only the sound of his own breaths, harsh in the chilling silence. Compelled by a mix of duty and fear, he moved towards the source of the sound, finding himself drawn to a small closet at the end of the room. As he approached, the door creaked open by itself, revealing nothing but empty shelves and old medical supplies. Nate, feeling foolish yet relieved, decided it was time to leave the ward. As he exited, the temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift. Nate laughed nervously to himself, attributing the experiences to his imagination fueled by the eerie setting. Back at the security office, he checked the time, 3 a.m. He decided to review the security footage to reassure himself. As he scanned through the videos, his eyes caught something that made his blood turn ice cold. In the footage of the pediatric ward, right where he had heard the giggle, a shadowy figure could be seen briefly. It wasn't his shadow. It was smaller, like that of a child, but it was distorted and flickered out of existence as he had turned away. Nate sat back, paralyzed with fear. He knew he should leave, report the occurrence, or perhaps pretend it never happened. But deep down, he felt a pull, an inexplicable need to understand what was lurking in the shadows of Coldbrook Hospital. Part 2, echoes in the dark. For the next few nights, Nate was haunted by what he had seen. He researched the hospital's history, uncovering tales of a tragic fire in the pediatric ward that claimed several young lives decades ago. The knowledge weighed heavily on him, but it also stoked a burning curiosity. Determined to face his fears, Nate ventured again into the north wing during his next shift. This time, he brought a voice recorder, hoping to capture any sounds or voices. As he neared the pediatric ward, the atmosphere thickened, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and something else, something foul and cloying. The red ball was still there, sitting innocuously in the hallway. Nate pushed it lightly with his foot, and it rolled into the ward as if guided by an unseen hand. Following it, he noticed something different, tiny, charred handprints on the walls, low to the ground, as if belonging to a child trying to escape. He set up the voice recorder and asked tentatively, "Is anyone here with me?" The silence stretched on, then a series of soft thuds echoed through the room, as if someone, or something, was running around him. Nate held his breath, recording every sound, every moment of this terrifying dance with the unseen. Part 2, Echoes in the Dark, continued. Nate, steeling himself against the swelling fear, kept the recorder on, his only lifeline to the reality he knew. The thuds grew louder, more frantic, and then, as suddenly as they began, they stopped. The silence that fell was so profound that Nate could hear the thrum of his own heartbeat. He dared not move, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Then, the child's voice returned, clearer this time, a whisper that seemed to caress his ear. "Why won't you play with us?" Nate's breath hitched in his throat. The voice was eerily melodic, and though it spoke of play, its tone carried an undercurrent of malice. He wanted to run, to escape the madness that seemed to seep from the very walls of the pediatric ward, but his legs refused to cooperate. He was rooted to the spot by both terror and an overwhelming need to know more. "Who are you?" Nate managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and then the giggling started again, this time accompanied by a series of whispers, echoing around him in a chorus of disjointed voices. The words were indistinct, overlapping and intertwining, creating a tapestry of sound that was both beautiful and horrifying. Nate felt the air around him grow colder, the temperature dropping until he could see his breath clouding in the beam of his flashlight. He swung the light around, catching fleeting glimpses of figures, small, childlike shapes that darted in and out of the darkness. The sight sent a chill down his spine, colder than the air that enveloped him. Summoning every ounce of courage, Nate pressed on, following the echoes and the faint footprints that marred the dusty floor. They led him to the back of the ward, to a room that was more intact than the others. The door was slightly ajar, and from within, he could hear a soft sobbing. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from his trembling flashlight. The beam fell on an old, rusted crib, its bars encrusted with what looked like decades of neglect. The sobbing grew louder, and Nate approached, his hand reaching out almost of its own accord. As his hand touched the crib, the sobbing stopped abruptly, and the room was plunged into a silence so dense it felt like a physical weight. Then the air moved, and Nate felt a cold hand grip his. He recoiled in horror, stumbling backward, his flashlight dropping to the ground. The beam flickered, then steadied, illuminating a small figure standing by the crib. The figure was that of a little girl, her features blurred and indistinct, but her eyes were a vivid, terrifying blue that burned with an unnatural light. She looked at Nate, her lips moving silently, and then pointed to the wall behind her. Trembling, Nate picked up his flashlight and shone it where she pointed. Scrawled across the wall, in what looked disturbingly like ash, were the words, "Help us leave." Nate's mind raced, his fear mingled with a desperate need to help these trapped spirits. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The girl's figure began to fade, her voice echoing in the still air. "The fire, it took us. Help us leave." As her voice trailed off, Nate was left in darkness, the flashlight flickering out, leaving him in an oppressive blackness. His heart raced, and he fumbled for the door, needing to escape, to breathe air untainted by the sorrow of the past. He stumbled back to the security office, the weight of the girl's plea heavy on his soul. He knew he couldn't leave this mystery unsolved. There were spirits here, children lost to a tragedy long forgotten, and they were asking for his help. Part 3, The Unseen Bonds. Over the next few days, Nate researched the history of Coldbrook Hospital more thoroughly. He discovered that in 1952, a fire had indeed ravaged the pediatric ward. It was reported that faulty wiring was to blame, but there were whispers of something more sinister, a story about a discredited doctor whose experiments had gone horrifically wrong. These experiments, according to local legend, involved using dangerous treatments to cure childhood psychoses, treatments that were not sanctioned and were highly experimental. Nate felt a chill as he read about the doctor, Dr. Jonathan Meyer, whose license had been revoked posthumously. The reports suggested that he had been a charismatic man, his methods initially celebrated as groundbreaking before they were revealed as grotesque and unethical. It was said that his presence lingered in the hospital, his spirit as restless and Part 3, the unseen bonds, continued, haunted as those of the children he was supposed to heal. Nate couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Meyer's dark legacy was somehow key to the unrest in the hospital. Determined to uncover the truth, Nate planned a return to the pediatric ward during his next shift, this time equipped with more than just a flashlight and a recorder. He brought a camera to document anything unusual, and an EMF, electromagnetic field, meter, often used by paranormal investigators to detect the presence of spirits. That night, as Nate approached the north wing, the air felt charged, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The corridor leading to the pediatric ward seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing loudly against the silence. When he finally reached the ward, the door to the room with the crib swung open as if welcoming him back. Nate set up the EMF meter and turned on his camera, positioning it to capture the entire room. He then sat down near the crib, his voice recorder in hand. "I'm here to help," he spoke into the darkness, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Tell me what I need to do." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the EMF meter began to beep rapidly, its lights flashing wildly. Nate watched in awe as a cold wind swept through the room, the temperature dropping until his breath became visible. The camera's viewfinder showed fluctuations in the image, as if something, or someone, was moving just out of frame. Then, the children's voices returned, a multitude of them speaking all at once, their words overlapping into an unintelligible whisper. But amidst the chaos, one phrase became clear, repeated over and over, "Release us from him." Nate felt a chill run down his spine. "From Dr. Meyer?" he asked tentatively. The temperature in the room dropped further, and the voices crescendoed into a desperate plea. "Yes, release us." Determined to understand more, Nate asked, "How? How can I release you?" The voices faded, and the EMF meter returned to normal. The room felt empty, the presence that filled it moments before gone as quickly as it had appeared. Nate sat in the silence, pondering the children's request. It was clear that whatever Dr. Meyer had done, his actions had left a lasting imprint on the hospital, trapping the spirits of those he was meant to protect. Nate's research into Dr. Meyer revealed a possible solution. According to old hospital records, Dr. Meyer had a private office in the basement of the hospital, a place where many of his treatments were administered. Local law suggested that his office was sealed after the fire, his records and equipment left untouched. Feeling a mixture of dread and determination, Nate decided that he needed to find Dr. Meyer's office. If there was anything there that could help release the children's spirits, he had to find it. Part 4, The Depths of Coldbrook ***, with only the dim light of his flashlight to guide him, Nate made his way to the basement. The air grew colder with each step downward, the oppressive atmosphere thickening. As he reached the basement level, the silence was profound, as if sound itself was afraid to enter. The basement was a labyrinth of corridors and abandoned rooms, relics of a bygone era scattered throughout. Nate's flashlight flickered as he navigated the maze, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Finally, he found the door to Dr. Meyer's office. It was a heavy, metal door sealed with a rusty padlock. Nate broke the padlock with some effort, the sound echoing ominously through the empty corridors. As the door creaked open, a gust of stale air rushed out, carrying with it a hint of chemicals and decay. Nate stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating a room that time had forgotten. The office was filled with old medical equipment, shelves of dusty books, and piles of paperwork. In the center of the room, a large, old-fashioned treatment chair was bolted to the floor, its leather straps frayed and worn. The walls were lined with photographs of children, their eyes hauntingly hollow, as if they had seen too much. Nate felt a wave of sadness wash over him, the weight of the children's suffering palpable in the air. He began to search through the papers, looking for anything that might help him understand how to release the spirits. As he did, the room grew colder, and the faint sound of children crying filled the air, their sobs echoing off the stone walls. He sifted through the documents, finding treatment notes, experiment logs, and personal journals that painted a picture of a man consumed by his own ambition, his ethics long since eroded. Amidst the papers, Nate found a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn. He opened it carefully, **Part 4, The Depths of Coldbrook, continued, **, his hands trembling slightly as the pages creaked under his touch. The book was Dr. Myers' personal diary, filled with rambling entries that detailed his experiments and theories. As Nate read, he began to understand the depth of Myers' obsession with transcending traditional medical practices, venturing into realms of the mind that were better left unexplored. The diary revealed that Meyer believed he could cure the children by altering their subconscious minds, erasing the tremors and fears that plagued them. However, his methods were untested and dangerous, often leaving the children in a state of perpetual fear, trapped between consciousness and a nightmarish dreamscape. Meyer's last entry was frantic, scribbled in a shaky hand. It spoke of a final experiment gone horribly wrong, a fire that started in the treatment room and quickly spread, consuming everything in its path. As Nate absorbed the horrors documented in the diary, the room seemed to close in around him, the shadows deepening, stretching like fingers across the floor. A cold wind whispered through the room, carrying with it the faint sounds of children crying, their voices more desperate now, as if they too were reading over his shoulder, reliving their terror. Determined to put an end to this nightmare, Nate searched for any clue on how to release the trapped spirits. Deeper in the diary, he found mention of a locked cabinet in the room, where Meyer kept his most private records and artifacts. Nate looked up from the diary to see the cabinet in the corner, a heavy padlock securing it. With a sense of urgency, he broke the lock and opened the cabinet. Inside, among various strange artifacts, was a small, intricately carved box. According to the diary, it contained objects from the children's personal belongings, items that Meyer used in his experiments to create a stronger psychic link. Nate felt a chill as he realized that these items, these remnants of lost lives, might hold the key to freeing the children's spirits. He carefully gathered the box and the diary, preparing to leave the oppressive darkness of the basement. As he turned to go, the air grew icy, and a shadow swept across the wall, fast and fleeting. The cries of the children intensified, a sorrowful symphony that seemed both a plea and a warning. Nate hurried through the corridors, the weight of his discovery heavy in his arms. Part 5, Breaking the Bonds back in the safety of the security office, Nate laid out the contents of the box. There were small toys, a faded photograph, a lock of hair tied with a ribbon, each item echoing a child's life cut tragically short. He placed them carefully on the table, arranging them as if they were sacred relics. As he did, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the lights flickered. Nate sensed he was not alone, the air was thick with the presence of those long gone. He spoke softly into the stillness, "I know you're here. I want to help you. Tell me what I need to do." The response came not in words but in a rush of images that flooded his mind. He saw the children, their faces distorted by fear, trapped in the fiery chaos that had claimed their lives. He felt their pain, their confusion, and their longing for release. Nate's eyes were drawn to the photograph, a picture of the children standing in front of the hospital, smiling, unaware of the fate that awaited them. His gaze then shifted to the diary, to a passage he had overlooked before. It detailed a ritual, something Meyer had concocted in his madness, intended to bind the children's spirits to him, to the hospital, forever. Armed with this knowledge, Nate knew what he had to do. He would have to recreate the ritual, but this time, he would invert it, use it to sever the ties that bound the spirits, rather than reinforce them. He gathered the items, setting them in a circle as the diary instructed. He recited the words written there, each syllable heavy with the weight of responsibility. The air around him grew denser, the shadows darker, as if the night itself were pressing against the windows, watching, waiting. As Nate spoke the final words, a profound silence enveloped the room. The shadows seemed to pulse, then retreat, and a light, soft and warm, filled the space. The children's voices rose in a chorus, no longer cries of fear, but whispers of thanks, fading into the stillness. Nate felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a sense of peace settling around him. But as he looked around, reassured by the calm, he noticed something unsettling. The diary, open on the table, displayed a page he had not seen before, written in a hurried scrawl. It warned of a consequence, a balance to be maintained. Beware, it read, ***, Part 5, breaking the bonds, continued, ***, beware, for every spirit released, a void is created, longing to be filled. Nate's heart sank as he absorbed the ominous warning. The peace that had momentarily filled the room seemed to evaporate, replaced once again by a creeping chill that slithered along the walls and through the cracks in the floor. The hospital, its hunger awakened by the breaking of old bonds, seemed to groan under the weight of a newfound emptiness. Determined not to be deterred by the warning, Nate steeled himself. He had set out to free the spirits, and he had succeeded, but now he faced a new challenge, the void left behind, a dark more silently demanding to be sated. He pondered the diary's warning, wondering what force or entity might seek to fill the emptiness created by the children's release. The hospital itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its long corridors and abandoned wings echoing with the sounds of its grim history. Nate realized that Coldbrook was not just a container for the spirits it held, it was a participant in its own dark narrative, its walls saturated with decades of psychic trauma. As he prepared to leave the security office, the lights flickered violently, casting jagged shadows against the walls. A cold draft swept through the room, and Nate felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He turned quickly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, only the oppressive silence of an empty room. Nate decided he needed to understand more about the nature of the void he had unwittingly opened. He returned to the basement, to Dr. Meyer's office, where the most potent remnants of the hospital's haunted past still lingered. As he descended the stairs, the air grew progressively colder, a silent whisper of the horrors that lay below. In the office, Nate approached the treatment chair, the epicenter of Dr. Meyer's cruel experiments. He noticed something he hadn't before, a series of scratches on the floor around the chair, as if something had been frequently dragged or repositioned. His flashlight beam traced the path of the scratches to a small, hidden door in the wall, partially obscured by a fallen bookshelf. Pushing the heavy shelf aside, Nate opened the door, revealing a narrow, dust-choked passage that delved deeper into the foundations of the hospital. A foul smell emanated from the dark tunnel, a mix of decay and something metallic, like blood. Nate hesitated, knowing that whatever lay at the end of this path was likely far more terrifying than anything he had encountered so far. Summoning his courage, he stepped into the passage. The air was thick, oppressive, as if breathing were an affront to the darkness that enveloped him. His flashlight flickered as he walked, shadows dancing along the crumbling walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human. The tunnel ended at a small chamber, its walls lined with old, rusted medical equipment and shelves crammed with jars containing unidentifiable specimens preserved in formaldehyde. In the center of the room stood an old iron lung, its surface dented and scratched, the glass viewing porthole fogged over with age. As Nate approached the iron lung, a sense of dread overwhelmed him. He could hear a faint, rhythmic sound, a slow, mechanical breathing that seemed to emanate from the machine itself. He reached out, wiping the dust from the glass to peer inside, and his blood froze. There, lying within the iron lung, was the preserved body of Dr. Jonathan Meyer, his eyes open, staring back at Nate with a malevolent intensity. His skin was pallid, stretched tight over his skeletal frame, and a twisted smile curled his lips, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The air in the chamber shifted, growing colder, and the iron lung began to hum, its mechanical parts stirring to life. Nate stumbled back, his mind racing with horror as he realized the truth. The void wasn't just a space left by the freed spirits, it was a prison for something far more sinister. As the iron lung creaked and groaned, Nate heard Dr. Meyer's voice, dry and cracked from disuse, whisper through the chamber, "Welcome, Nathaniel. You have freed my test subjects, but in doing so, you have given me a new one." Nate turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the tunnel as he fled from the chamber, the chilling laughter of Jonathan Meyer following him through the darkness. He knew now that freeing the spirits was only the beginning. Coldbrook Hospital held deeper secrets, ones that were now clawing their way to the surface, hungry for the light. As Nate burst out of the basement, gasping for air, the entire hospital seemed to shake with a silent, sinister mirth. It was alive, and its story was far from over. The void was open, and its appetite was immense. Nate staggered into the night, the chill of the hospital's basement still clinging to him like a second skin. The darkness outside was less oppressive than the shadows he had fled from within Coldbrook Hospital, yet the sense of unease followed him, weaving through the trees as if carried by the wind. He knew he couldn't just leave. The hospital, with its layers of untold horrors, wouldn't let him, not now that he had uncovered such deep-seated malevolence. Dr. Meyer, though dead for decades, was far from gone. His spirit, or whatever malignant remnant that remained, was bound to the hospital, fueled by the dark experiments he had conducted and now invigorated by the void Nate had unwittingly opened. Realizing the gravity of his situation, Nate made his way to his car, the gravel crunching loudly under his feet in the haunting silence of the night. He needed help. This was beyond him, beyond simple hauntings or ghostly children. Coldbrook was a nexus of supernatural forces, a focal point for something far darker than mere spirits. As he fumbled for his keys, a cold wind swept across the parking lot, bringing with it a faint whisper. "Nathaniel," the voice was there and not there, a shadow of sound that made Nate's heart skip a beat. He hurriedly unlocked his car and got inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind him. Turning the key in the ignition, he glanced back at the looming silhouette of the hospital. The windows, dark and empty, seemed to watch him, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing in one of the upper windows, a figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Driving away from Coldbrook, Nate's mind raced. He needed to find someone who understood these paranormal phenomena better than he did. Someone who could help him seal whatever Dr. Meyer had unleashed. But as he put distance between himself and the hospital, a terrible thought occurred to him. What if Coldbrook Hospital was merely a symptom of something much larger? What if its influence extended beyond the physical confines of its walls? As he pondered these questions, Nate noticed something in his rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty, but there was a faint mist, like the exhalation of a giant unseen creature, creeping along the ground, following his car. It swirled and twisted, and as Nate watched, it seemed to form faces of the children he had tried to save, their expressions twisted not in thanks, but in warning. He focused on the road ahead, trying to shake the feeling that he was not escaping, but merely postponing a confrontation. The further he drove, the more the mist seemed to dissipate, but the whisper of his name did not. It was there, in the rustle of the trees, in the hum of the wind, in the very air he breathed. Nate realized then that he could never truly leave Coldbrook. It was a part of him now, as much as he was a part of its history. Whatever darkness he had stirred within its walls was now a part of his story, a chapter that could not be closed so easily. As he drove through the night, the whispering wind offered no answers, only questions. Coldbrook Hospital, with its forgotten wards and haunted memories, remained behind him, a dark silhouette against the starless sky, its secrets hidden within, waiting for the next unwary soul to uncover them. And as the road stretched out before him, Nate understood the true horror was not in what he had fled from, but in what might yet come. The story of Coldbrook Hospital was far from over.